Have you ever faced a burglar armed with nothing but your birthday suit? That's exactly what happened to me one quiet evening at home. I was relaxing on my couch when a loud bang at the door shattered my peace. In that heart-stopping moment, I made a split-second decision that would change everything. Grabbing the nearest object, which happened to be a decorative sword, I charged towards the noise, completely naked. What happened next left both me and the intruder shocked beyond belief. A loud bang shattered the peaceful night, sending chills down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Just moments ago, I'd been lounging on my couch, scrolling through my phone and enjoying a quiet evening at home. Now, the air felt thick with tension. I held my breath, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but eerie silence. Then I heard it, footsteps echoing from the hallway. They were faint at first, but grew louder with each passing second. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it just my imagination? A neighbor? Or something far more sinister? My body tensed up as adrenaline flooded my system. I felt my heart rate skyrocket and my palms grow clammy. It was like time slowed down, yet everything was happening so fast. I realized I was experiencing a classic fight-or-flight response. In high-stress situations like this, our bodies prepare us to either confront the threat head-on or run for our lives. The footsteps were getting closer now. I could hear the floorboards creaking under the weight of the intruder. My mind flashed through possible scenarios. Should I hide? Try to escape? Call for help? I felt paralyzed by indecision, a phenomenon psychologists call analysis paralysis. In moments of extreme stress, our ability to think rationally can become impaired, making split-second decisions crucial. I knew I had to act fast. Home invasions often unfold in less than 10 minutes, leaving little time for carefully thought-out plans. As the footsteps paused just outside my room, I made a split-second decision. I lunged for the nearest object I could use for defense. My hand closed around something solid and heavy. I gripped it tightly, my knuckles turning white. The door handle started to turn, and I braced myself for what was about to happen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. As the door began to open, I suddenly realized what I'd grabbed wasn't exactly a conventional weapon. In fact, it was about the last thing I'd ever imagined using to fend off an intruder. But at that moment, with fear coursing through my veins and survival instinct taking over, I was ready to use whatever I had to protect myself. The weapon in my hands wasn't exactly what you'd expect for home defense. It was heavy, cold, and decidedly medieval. As I stood there, exposed in more ways than one, I realized I was about to find out if a naked man with a sword could really scare off a burglar. I suddenly became acutely aware of my complete nakedness. I felt vulnerable and exposed, my skin prickling with goosebumps. It was like one of those dreams where you show up to school without clothes, except this was a nightmare come to life. The weight of the sword in my hands was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to run and hide, to cover myself up and pretend this wasn't happening. But another part, a primal part, was ready to fight. The fear of the intruder outweighed my embarrassment. I gripped the sword tighter, feeling a surge of determination. The sword itself was a sight to behold. It was a replica katana I'd bought on a whim at a Renaissance fair last year. The blade was about 3 feet long, with a curved edge that glinted in the dim light. The handle was wrapped in dark blue fabric, providing a surprisingly good grip even with my sweaty palms. I never thought I'd actually use it for anything other than decoration. I remembered reading somewhere that unconventional weapons can be surprisingly effective in self-defense. The element of surprise can throw an attacker off balance. And let's face it, a naked guy with a sword is about as surprising as it gets. I hoped this unexpected combination would be enough to deter the intruder. The footsteps outside my room suddenly stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited, sword at the ready. Then, slowly, the door began to creak open. I tensed, raising the sword higher. The gap widened, revealing a shadowy figure. As light from the hallway spilled into the room, I saw the intruder's face for the first time. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the scene before him. For a moment, we were both frozen in place. I saw confusion flicker across his face, quickly followed by disbelief. Then, as his gaze moved from my face to the gleaming sword in my hands, his expression shifted. The confusion morphed into something else entirely: fear. Have you ever wondered what goes through a burglar's mind when their plan suddenly unravels? As we stood there, locked in a surreal standoff, I was about to find out firsthand how quickly the hunter can become the hunted. Our eyes met, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. The intruder was a tall, lanky guy, probably in his late 20s. He wore dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But what struck me most was the look of utter disbelief on his face. His mouth hung open, eyes wide with shock as he took in the scene before him. A naked man wielding a sword. I could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to process what was happening. His gaze darted from my face to the sword and back again. I noticed his hands trembling slightly, and his body language screamed uncertainty. It was clear he hadn't expected any resistance, let alone this bizarre scenario. We stood there, frozen in a tableau that felt like it lasted forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and I saw a bead of sweat trickle down the intruder's temple. The air was thick with tension, neither of us daring to make the first move. At that moment, I remembered reading about nonverbal communication in high-stress situations. Our bodies were speaking volumes without a single word being uttered. My stance, despite my nakedness, was one of defiance and readiness. The sword in my hands gleamed menacingly, a clear threat. The burglar, on the other hand, was radiating fear and indecision. His shoulders were hunched, his body angled slightly away from me, as if ready to bolt at any second. The standoff continued, both of us seemingly trapped in this surreal moment. I could almost see the wheels turning in the intruder's mind as he weighed his options: fight or flight. The sword in my hands probably tipped the scales pretty heavily towards flight. Suddenly, as if a spell had been broken, the burglar's fight-or-flight response kicked in. He chose flight. In a flurry of movement, he spun around and lunged for the door. But in his panic, his feet got tangled up, and he stumbled, nearly falling flat on his face. I watched in a mix of relief and disbelief as the intruder scrambled to regain his footing. He half ran, half stumbled down the hallway, bumping into walls in his haste to escape. The sound of his frantic footsteps echoed through the house, growing fainter as he fled. As the front door slammed shut and the sound of his retreat faded away, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins started to subside, leaving me feeling shaky and slightly nauseous. I lowered the sword, my arms suddenly feeling like lead weights. I stood there, naked and alone in my living room, trying to process the events of the last few minutes. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt like the safe haven it had been earlier that evening. As the initial shock wore off, a new feeling began to creep in, one that would linger long after this night was over. In the eerie silence that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Little did I know, the most unsettling revelations were yet to come. As the adrenaline drained from my body, I started shaking uncontrollably. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice felt surreal against the chaos in my head. I managed to stammer out what had happened, feeling slightly ridiculous as I mentioned the sword and my lack of attire. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the quiet night. I had barely managed to throw on some clothes before they knocked on my door. 2 officers entered, their faces a mix of concern and barely concealed amusement as I recounted my story. They listened intently, asking questions and jotting down notes. I watched as they meticulously examined the house, dusting for fingerprints and collecting evidence. It felt strange, seeing my home turned into a crime scene. As the police worked, I noticed a small crowd gathering outside. News travels fast in our neighborhood, and curious faces peered through windows and over fences. I could hear whispers and see pointing fingers. Part of me wanted to hide, but another part felt oddly relieved. The secret was out, and I wasn't alone anymore. One of the officers approached me, a slight smile on his face. "Good news," he said. "We caught the guy a few blocks away." He was pretty shaken up. I felt a mix of relief and disbelief wash over me. The officer continued, explaining that the intruder was a known petty criminal with a history of breaking and entering. Apparently, my unconventional defense had scared him so badly, he practically turned himself in. As the police wrapped up their investigation and the neighbors slowly dispersed, I was left alone in my house again. But it didn't feel the same. Every creak and shadow made me jump. I kept replaying the incident in my mind, wondering what could have happened if I hadn't grabbed that sword. The thought sent shivers down my spine. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly on edge. I triple-checked the locks, startled at every unexpected noise. Sleep became elusive, my dreams haunted by shadowy figures and gleaming blades. I knew I should feel safe. The intruder was caught after all, but I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. My neighbors, initially curious and supportive, began to treat me differently. Some avoided eye contact, while others seemed almost eager to discuss the incident, as if it was the most exciting thing to happen in our quiet suburb. I wasn't sure which reaction was worse. As the days turned into weeks, I realized this experience had left a deeper mark than I'd initially thought. The safety I once felt in my own home seemed like a distant memory. I started considering therapy, wondering if talking about it might help me process what happened. Maybe sharing my story could be the first step towards healing. But even as I tried to move forward, a nagging feeling persisted. This wasn't over yet. Looking back on that crazy night, I'm still amazed at how things turned out. Who would have thought that being naked with a sword could actually save my life? It's wild how the most unexpected actions can lead to the best outcomes sometimes. I've learned that home safety isn't just about locks and alarms. It's about thinking on your feet and adapting to whatever situation you find yourself in. Sure, I probably wouldn't recommend my exact strategy to everyone, but it worked for me at that moment. This whole experience has made me realize how unpredictable life can be. One minute you're relaxing at home, the next you're facing down an intruder in your birthday suit. It's scary, but it's also kind of empowering to know that I was able to protect myself when it really mattered. I still get a little jumpy sometimes when I hear unexpected noises at night. But I also feel stronger now, knowing that I can handle myself in a crisis, even if that crisis involves being caught with my pants down. Thanks for watching this true home invasion story, an unforgettable night, where survival instincts, a bit of humor, and an unconventional weapon saved the day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Have you ever had a bizarre or scary experience like this? Drop your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. And remember, the best defense might just be a sword. But hopefully, you'll never have to find out. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.